Hi everyone, Jeff Hall. I'm here with another edition of Westford Tales. And this is what we take. We interview people who are associated with Westford, grew up in Westford, played a major role in Westford, lived most of their lives in Westford. The focus today is going to be on Graniteville, the area where I grew up, and my two guests I have with me. To my left, I have Barbara Courchaine. To my right, I have Nancy Bissell. I have a disclaimer here. Their maiden names are both Hall. So they're my cousins, I guess, twice removed or something to that effect. So we may have intertwining stories here as we go along. Our grandfathers were brothers. We've a picture of them in front of the old Hall homestead around 1900, where Ed and then John, my grandfather, and next to him, your grandfather, Ike. Okay? Both families on your side, the Nesmiths, who's your mother, and the Halls go back to Westford over 150 years. I want to start with you, Barbara. Talk a little bit about your father, okay, particularly. Let's look how the Halls got to Westford, first of all. They were living at that place at the end of Makepeace Road and Dunstable Road, where the old Hall homestead was, we showed a picture of a few minutes ago. There was a family reunion there in 1920, which you wouldn't remember.
Well, we had wonderful Hall reunions.
We did have, and the last one would have been 1960 up the Carkins Corner. I remember you showing me a bunch of the notes from that. But both families go back over 100 years. The Halls apparently came to Westford, in Graniteville specifically, to work where?
In the mills.
In the mills, specifically C.G. Sargent's, though.
For Grandpa's, yes.
Yeah.
Grandpa came to work in the machinery part of, but Grammy came to work in the yarn.
She was a Doucette.
She was
correct?
a Doucette.
Okay, so Isaac Hall and Lottie Doucette. And her real name was Charlotte. They married, and your father is born when?
1910.
1910. Okay, so your dad's born, and he never really leaves Graniteville, does he?
Never.
No, never. His entire life is spent there. He went to the sergeant school, okay, and then went to Westford Academy. He graduates when?
1928.
1928. And then he went to Northeastern, Nancy?
For a semester.
Yeah, first. Do you know why he only went one semester?
Yes, because of the, what's it called?
Depression.
Depression.
Yeah, okay, because 1920.
He actually had to come home and work. They needed his money.
And that was the case with a lot of people. I know my Uncle Donald, for example, had to quit school, even though his sisters graduated from Westford Academy, and my dad as well. But he went to work in the mills the same way. So he spent the semester at Northeastern. He became the chief engineer down at C.G. Sargent's, I guess, correct? Chief engineer there. And he and your mother marry in 1936. The wedding is held at the Nesmith's residence, okay? And they're married at 7:30 in the evening.
Okay.
All right? And 2 years later, Barbara's born.
That's right, 38.
Now, did they date in high school? Because they were both class of 1928, so they knew each other.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And I think the residual, once she went away, they did stay in contact because I've seen letters.
Okay. Yeah. Your father, when he went to work, and just to give kind of his background as well, he was a chief engineer. He did a great deal of traveling, didn't he, over the years?
Much.
Much.
Most of it was looking at rubber companies because the machinery that they were making, some of the machinery.
You spent a lot of time in Ireland particularly, correct? I guess that was one of the locations, yeah.
I don't remember that.
Yeah.
I know Nancy does.
But he, as he traveled, your mother took in boarders.
Yes, she actually had a very good business mind because she not only took in boarders, she actually eventually created the apartment. But the boarders that I remember, and Barbara does not agree with me, is that they were mill people.
Okay.
And they were men, and she has a different memory.
Let me clarify this too. When you were born in 1938, Barbara, when your mom and dad were first married, they lived on North Street in what's known as the Hammett Wright house, because Hammett Wright built it. And 2 years later, in 1938, they purchased the old Wright house. Okay. Mr. Wright, I believe, was the postmaster in Westford from the late 1800s until around the 1930s. And they purchased the house for $2,500?
$2,500.
$2,500. It's the house today where your son, Scott, and Claire are living, and the apartment you talked about is where you're living.
Correct.
And
So we rotate through the household.
Yeah, but you
The
told me
family
that
has-
your mother kind of built the apartment, had the apartment built without permits or...
It was a maid's quarters.
Oh, okay.
And I remember peeling the walls off and helping Mom get it set to,
Oh, really?
you know, it probably that stuff that came off the walls was deadly. It was brown.
Oh, okay. Who knows what was it back then? A little more about your father over the years. Both he and your mother were very active within the community. We spoke a little bit about how both your dad and your Uncle Phil were involved with the Nashoba Tech School Committee in the 1960s and 70s. But your father was a trustee at Westford Academy. He was a 32nd degree Mason out of the Hattawan Lodge over in Littleton, and I also know he was associated with the lodge in Lowell. Avid in making home movies, 8 and 16 millimeter movies. I know I've seen, he made some of the 1936 Forge Village Arrows playing up at what we would have known as the Health Club up on Coolidge Ave. And I remember seeing a picture of one of the ones he made, because we have a copy here that Nancy had contributed to the museum of a bunch of young girls coming out of the side of the Methodist Church. It must have been on Easter or something like that. But there's an awful lot of those types of things that he, in fact, he had made some back in the mid-70s of, I think, the Apple Blossom Parade after it got started again.
If it wasn't for Nancy, all of that would never have been taken care of. My mother was not interested, but Nancy and Dad did a lot with the pictures, and she saved everything.
And I've spent some time at Nancy organizing some of this stuff over the last.
No,
it's fascinating, absolutely
she's really
fascinating.
done a wonderful job.
Since you followed your mother's path, she was in Nesmith. They moved into Westford in the 1860s, I guess it was, the old Nesmith house. Harry and Hattie McLeod, I guess it is.
Correct.
Nesmith. She was a teacher, Hattie, at the old Parkerville School. And your mother went to the Parkerville School, and she remained very active there. Well, whenever they had reunions and whatnot, I know she was there. I've seen pictures of she and her brother, Norman.
The Non-Set Club.
Yeah, and also she was involved with the Nonset Club. But she was in town, and she graduated in 1928, Westford
Correct.
Academy. She went on and got a nursing degree, Nancy?
Yes, at Captain John Adams in Chelsea.
Okay.
And actually graduated from there in let's see, 28, 29, 30, 31. So it was 31 that she came out, and the letters that, you know, that she and my dad, she did date a lot of people, but the letters that they communicated, she definitely came back, and that is how they got married. But I actually have all of her history in terms of the schooling. So she was very active.
She went on to become the school nurse.
Right.
Yeah.
She was hired. After 15 years of not working, and I definitely remember, and I don't remember exactly the date, but she went back, and I took her blood pressure at the time to work, and she was hired by the Lowell VNA.
Okay.
And she was the Westford nurse out of the Lowell VNA.
Okay, so she worked in the Westford nurse out of the, so Dot Healy was another one of the nurses, correct?
Yes, and both actually, I don't remember if I definitely remember Dot Haley when I was in school. And she knew me very personally, but actually I've substituted in the schools here. And it's really funny because there are people that are teachers that come up to me and tell me about my mother and how she had this Mercedes that she used to drive them home if they were sick, and they were very good at pretending they were sick.
I think Dot Healy handled the elementary schools, because Dot drove me home the first time, a few times when I said I was sick. But a couple other things. She also, for 19 years, was the chief nurse at the...
No, at the East Boston camps.
East Boston camps, yeah.
And actually, I'm going to put a plug in here, because the East Boston camps, this is the 85th anniversary of the East Boston camps this year, 2022.
That's correct, yeah.
And so we're trying to put together something to...
We were going to wait until the 2037 for the 100th anniversary. You can be ready for it?
No,
Oh, okay.
but anyway, in terms of the East Boston, I actually, one of my children, I intertwined working there while the beginning and the end, and so actually my kids grew up at the East Boston camps too.
Spent a lot of time down there. The Nauset Club, you remember what the Nauset Club was?
It was kind of a little social club that developed at the Parker Village Schoolhouse.
Yeah.
And May
Balch.
Balch was the secretary.
May Balch was the secretary, yeah. And you, actually, May Balch, who, gosh, she had the writings and things like that, was close with your family, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was awful good to me.
Yeah.
She got so excited when she found out I was marrying someone with the letter B in his last name, because my name was Barbara, his name was Byrne, and she had spoons with B's on them. So I have a whole lot of B spoons.
There you go.
She was a wonderful, wonderful artist, wonderful friend.
And I know that in the past you talked a lot about how she had dinner. She would come have dinner at the
Once
house
a
and
week.
all
Every
that.
Wednesday night.
Probably one of the last families that had a real connection with May Balch, you know? I mean, you hear so much about her. Just the Balch family, originally Parkerville family, ultimately ended up moving to Boston Road. And on Boston Road. Well, we're kind of getting away from that. So we're getting back. You're born in 1938. Nancy's born in 1942. Both of you attended Sergeant School.
We did.
Okay? As a matter of fact, back then, Sergeant School handled grades 1 through 8. So you would have graduated from the Sergeant School in 1955, and you showed me you actually have a yearbook that you guys put together.
Yes, yes.
What are your memories of the Sergeant School? Barbara, anything in particular stick out?
Oh.
Lillian Wright?
Oh. Well, I did have a little encounter with Lily Wright. She wasn't very popular. She taught 7th grade. She had a cat o' nine tails thing that she could whack you with when she felt like it. And one day, I don't know what happened to me, but I was sitting very close to the piano bench, and we had just had an art class, and there was a wet cloth on my desk, and when Miss Wright went to sit down, I just put it underneath. And I thought I got away with it, but I got a U with a red line under it. And
Somebody rat you out, is that what happened?
on my report card. My father was not happy.
So, she was the mischievous one of the two of you?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
did you do things?
We always had been. I was always the good one. She was always the bad one.
It's true.
I think you were there, Barbara. We talked a little bit about kind of one of the things that occurred. You used to walk back and forth, both of you, to get to school. But in 1948, CG sergeants had gone on strike. They had unionized. We found out the demands, interesting enough, they were looking for a 30-cent raise in pay, and they wanted to increase their number of paid holidays, because they only had 2 paid holidays. We don't know which ones they were, from 2 to 6. And that strike lasted for 23 years. 23 weeks. 23 weeks. Let's get into who the characters were here. Phil, right? Your Uncle Phil
Yeah.
and your father, they're working in the office.
That's right.
And across the street is their father, Isaac, who Phil lives with. And he's with the strikers, along with my dad, my grandfather, my uncle. So the halls are in conflict with one another. Okay? How did that affect family relations? Any idea?
It was terrible.
Yeah.
It was terrible enough that when I first started going to school, when they started striking, I would get things thrown at me, rocks thrown at me, and finally the police had to come and bring me to school and bring me home from school. And my grandfather got so upset, he had a heart attack and never ever went back to work again. It wasn't.
My dad at the time was working, and he left sergeants at the time and went to work at a little sheet metal shop up in Groton and never returned to sergeant. So although Jack, my grandfather, and my uncle Donald both stayed on for years until both of them, Jack died of a heart attack and Donald had heart problems and ended up leaving. But one of a family like that, close, and it had the effect on you at sergeant school that you were actually driven by the police cruiser to get to school.
I couldn't understand it. What year was it, Jeff? Did you
48.
say?
1948.
So
Yep.
I was 10, but I should have been. I think Dad didn't really want to talk about why, maybe if he didn't talk about it, it'd go away.
Yeah.
But it didn't, it wasn't nice.
That was 1948. 1949, you told me that your family gets their first TV.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh.
What was the purpose of the TV?
We had to watch the McCarthy hearings.
The McCarthy hearings. So when we get into the 1950s, you're going to find out that the Cold War was going on, and it does have some kind an effect on both of you at the time, correct? We're also going to find out that you, for example, Barbara, you leave sergeant school, you attend high school, okay, from 1951 until 1955. Barbara was the last class to graduate from what we now know as the Road and Bush Community Center,
That's right.
okay, in 55. So you're there in the early 50s. What kind of music are you listening to?
Oh, Johnny Ray.
Johnny Ray,
was my
okay.
favorite. I was trying to think the other day. I loved jazz. It was
Glenn Miller?
Glenn Miller.
Glenn Miller's, his
A lot
sound?
of us went to the Newport Jazz Festival all through there.
Okay.
I don't know that the Commodore, when there was a lot of dancing.
Yeah.
So I honestly can't say that I had a favorite. Elvis was just coming on.
That was her group.
Yes, yes. But I remember Elvis kind of breaking it up
Yeah.
into a, but I do remember Johnny Ray, which for some reason or other
Yeah.
is kind of.
Funny story about TVs, though, you had just spoken about. You said that the first person in Graniteville owned a TV was your grandmother.
Right.
And they lived at 49, I think it's 49 Broadway. Ike and Lottie and Phil. And what did she do with the TV 5 o'clock at night?
She'd roll it over to her bay window, and the kids would sit outside on the lawn, and there was a thing called the clutching hand, and this thing would come on. But that little TV was only like that, and they got a great big magnet,
Yeah.
magnifying thing to put in front of it so everybody could see it.
Yeah.
Some nights there were 10 or 12 kids out on the lawn.
You know, it's funny. I can only compare it to Wyman's Lunch in Forge Village. Because one of the stories back then was he had a TV, and was it Danny Provo told me that he, as a kid, used to come down, and Hoppy Wyman, who owned Wyman's Lunch, would let them go in and watch, and there was a show on in the afternoon, and he knew exactly when that show was over. He'd say, "Okay, you kids, get out of here," and off they would get. But you know, TVs were few and far between.
Yeah.
I mean, you would have had Milton Berle's, you know, but you didn't spend a lot of time with those.
Ed Sullivan was.
Ed Sullivan, yeah.
Not much.
Yeah, and that was, you graduate in 1955, and that's the first part of that. And then, Nancy, you start high school after what's now the Abbott School opens, and you're the first class to actually go 9 through 12 there.
Correct.
But when it opened, it was 7 through 12,
Correct.
grade 7 through 12. And you graduate in 1959. Culturally, Elvis has come on the scene, okay? He's a big thing. You talked a little bit about, you know, the Mickey Mouse Club, I can remember, but there was a spin-off from that, Spin and Marty.
Spin and Marty, yes.
Yeah.
We actually, it's interesting in the fact that, you know, Barbara's remembrances, a lot of them, for example, the Grammy doing that with the TV, I have no recollection of at all.
Yeah.
But when it comes to high school, went in, and it took us, and I still see a lot of my classmates,
Yeah.
surprisingly. And a lot of them are still around here.
Cora Picking.
Yeah. Well, Adrian Elcon, there's a certain group, Adrian Elcon, who is in New Hampshire, and Diane Holmes,
Diane Holmes,
Diane Vincent, she was.
Yep.
And we get together quite frequently. Tommy McGavin was in Colorado, and there were quite a few of them that
Do you reminisce about old times?
we actually we were able in Abbott or Westford Academy were able to have at lunchtime we used to actually get in there and rock and roll. You could dance.
Oh, okay, yeah.
They actually had a period that after we ate that you could do that, and
Somebody with disc jockey, or?
I think they did their own disc jockeying.
Okay, yep. Because I know the Fields.
It was in the gym that we did this.
Was it Jeff or Jeremy Fields that was the disc jockey, I know, at Murray's, and he would have been around that time.
Right.
Yeah. So he would have had a record.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if he would have been the one.
It's feasible because
Yeah.
everyone was very independent, and we used to have a lot of parties, and actually, I loved Frank Sinatra, and
Okay,
that was
yeah.
very strange.
He kind of transcended that entire
Yeah.
decade.
Well,
Yeah.
her father
Yeah.
loved Frank Sinatra
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
We
And
actually,
Bing Crosby.
we actually have in the house, I have in the house now, a couch. This is very strange. A couch that we had similar to in the den that would tip up and become a bed. We had all the records in the original house, in the den, in this bed, and Barbara and I used to jump on it. And actually, all of the records that they had, when eventually they discovered were all broken because we had ruined their record collection.
Well, you know, it's funny, and then getting back to my family, you mentioned records. My mother was into country western, and she had 78, she had a lot of the country stars, particularly Hank Williams, particularly. And so she played these things all day. And I'd be riding along with Pam, and a country western song come on, and I knew all the words. She says, how do you know that? I said, because I heard it all as a kid, and I know those things by heart today just because that's what I grew up with. A couple of the people I want to mention, you know, getting back to Graniteville itself, your father worked at C.G. Sargent's, so he walked to work every day. But your mother was the nurse in town.
Right.
And you did have an automobile.
Yes.
Okay.
Every 3 years.
And so
New
who
one.
fixed the automobile?
Oh, it was Uncle Norman. It was Norman Nesmith garage right on Broadway.
So
Yeah.
just so people know where that is, it was originally Frank Furbish's, built around 1920. We had a Chevrolet dealership there. Frank was very active in town politics, I guess a selectman for one time. So he must have sold it to Norman, okay?
Must have, yeah.
And he ran his garage there. It was ultimately, Norman turned it over to Bob Herman, and Bob Herman ran that garage in the 60s into 70s before Bob moved up into,
I never knew that.
Yeah, I never knew that either.
yeah, Bob, yeah, because my brother Roger actually had worked for him at the time. In the house on 49 Broadway was your Uncle Ike's house,
Right.
okay? Your grandfather, I call him Uncle Ike, sorry. But your grandfather. But Ike also owned a large portion of land up on Millstone Hill.
Right.
Oh, yes, he did.
And it was a farm, you said?
It was called the farm, but really what it was a hunting cabin that everybody in the world knew about, and it was in the middle of nowhere. It actually was land that Lincoln Lab, MIT, took over. And originally they took it over by eminent domain.
And he had his second heart attack.
Oh, okay, yeah.
No, Grandpa actually originally donated that to the...
I remember you telling me that.
Yeah.
I'm getting into the legal parts of it.
Yeah.
And ultimately were reimbursed to some extent.
However, there was acres and acres of land. Actually, Cora Picking and I were just talking about this. They owned all the land up to where Grandpa Hall had land, and then it went all the way to Flavel Road
Yeah,
in
Flavel
Groton.
Road,
So
yeah.
there was acres and acres of land
Sure.
that he owned, and I tried to figure out how he owned all this land. And because it was incredibly, but it turns out,
We talked a little bit about that, Nancy. I mean, here's Ike working, it's 1943,
Yeah.
he's working in the mill, and he buys 100 acres of land. And I'm saying,
anyway,
where did he get the money and
Yeah.
all of that, and how cheap was land back then?
But
And it's interesting because Cliff, his brother, actually owned a house on Millstone Road, so he must have got that land from Ike. I don't know, but I want to get back to a couple of these other things here. Uncle Phil, just for a minute, lived at Broadway after Ike passed away. Phil stayed there, okay?
Yes. He
Phil-
actually was the main provider in this household.
Maid provider in the household with Ike after his heart
Yeah,
attack. He ends up marrying Dottie Harrington, Dorothy Hall, who many would remember in town because she was very active with the senior center. She was the shine officer up there at the senior center for years. Barbara, getting back to you, you went on to school, got your degree from where?
I have my degree from Tufts.
And then you came back to Westford to teach for a bit, right?
When I was looking for a place to do my student teaching on my way to my degree, I checked with my instructor at Tufts to discover that Westford had never had a person. So I said, come out and take a look. They were so taken by Westford, just the arrangement, the grammar schools, I'm sure they're still sending kids out from school, but I student taught with my Tufts soul under my own second grade teacher, Jean Bell.
My second grade teacher.
Yeah.
Your second grade teacher, yes.
And,
Jean Bell, which, by the way, was graduated from Westford Academy, Bell family, in 1926, okay?
Wow.
And she graduated, she started her teaching career at, I believe, at the Sergeant School, or one of the elementary schools, and remained until 1971, and then she went on to be a substitute for years.
She scared me to death.
And me.
When I was 7 years old, I remember going to school. I wouldn't have been bad in that second grade if you'd paid me. Oh my God.
But it was quite an experience working with her as a teacher after.
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
And she was a wonderful teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just never forget. I don't think I said a word.
From where you guys lived, if you went into the woods and back, you were at the Quarries. Did you spend time up there at all?
We lived up there. We lived up there, and actually, I remember being very, very small, and I had Smokey, the dog. He was my protector, and I was fearless, absolutely fearless, and I remember going up, and I don't remember who I was with, really, but we used to go up and we would go into what was, and they had been working, they definitely were working, the quarry. We would go up into these caverns that actually had some of the tidal pools in them.
Sure.
And go swimming. And in terms of danger, it was incredible when you really think about what we did. And none of us cared. And today, this would never happen. But we used to find dynamite sticks all the time, and we'd bring them home and give them to our parents.
I remember doing the same kinds of things with, Roger and I and the Pendlebury
You'd
boys.
You'd jump off the rope into the water, and
30 years later, bringing our kids up there and looking, saying, get back a little bit, get back a little bit. I'm saying, we used to walk along these ledges, The Mill Pond in Graniteville. Did you skate there?
We skated in the Mill Pond, but we skated in the part of it that was closest down towards the railroad.
Okay.
Towards
But that wasn't your main skating place in Graniteville. It was where?
the blacksmith.
The blacksmith. You fished in the Mill Pond, right?
I did fish in the Mill Pond.
Did you
I
fish?
used to
Were
get
you
hornpout.
fishing? I didn't like it because what they did, they were so mean to those fish. They'd catch them and then they'd throw them under, wait for a car to come along and throw the fish under the tire. I couldn't stand it. I didn't want.
But you mentioned the horn pout, or catfish
Oh,
as they know.
yes, yeah.
Great eating, but tough cleaning.
I don't think I ever ate anything I caught.
No, and I can remember with Denny Jewett being down there and fishing. But you guys were both associated, along with your parents for years, with the Methodist Church, okay? Of course, you went through whatever activities. I remember you telling me before you fell asleep at the age of 3 during the long sermon.
A long talk.
Okay.
Yeah,
Bobby-
when's the big talk going to be over?
But you were active.
Oh, I was, right? Ironically, right up until the week before I got married to Ed Byrne in the Catholic Church in Littleton.
Okay.
I taught Sunday school there. In fact, when I was going to college, Ed and I ran the MYF on Sunday nights.
Okay.
I played.
I remember. I was a member there.
I played the organ.
Yeah.
I wasn't very good, but they didn't have anybody else. But I know I have a great.
You know, it's I just happened to come across this. Pam and I were talking about some old TV show, and I said, "Kooky" on 77 Sunset Strip was played by the character Ed Byrne. And so when your Eddie came, we thought this guy was so cool. Hey, this is Kooky. Well, she's married to, she's going on with this guy with the same name as Kooky. Yeah. And Eddie, of course, he had the convertible at the time, right?
Oh, he had. We had convertibles.
Yeah. I just want to talk a little bit. You know, you and Eddie were married. Eddie's family was associated with Delldale Farms over in Littleton, and maintained that for years and years to come until ultimately the farm. You know, Eddie always had heart problems. If you ever met greatest guy you'd ever want to meet. I mean, Eddie was just a super individual. But after Eddie passed away, you remarried. Remarried a classmate from 1955.
I did.
Yeah. Class reunion or just old friendships?
Well, when I had the kids, Fred changed all the diapers on my kids. He used to come over on the weekends, and we'd have these funny football games where they'd run around and tear each other's shirts off. And so we always had been friends since the time. And I honestly think that I was so despondent when Ed died. I don't know what I would have done without him. He's been wonderful. So I wound up a Courchaine.
It's kind of how life goes for a cycle, full cycle in cases like that. And so, you know, and you guys are now living up in New Hampshire. Yeah.
Up in Hollis.
Nancy, from there, okay, so you graduate, you leave here for a while.
Right.
Okay.
For quite a while.
For quite a while, okay? You moved to New Hampshire. You were up in Coldbrook, I guess, for a while.
Well, actually, I was in Colorado first.
Yeah.
And so I have actually gone around the country. But eventually came back, and actually when my dad died in 1980, came back, and that's when I was total family, and actually worked at Normandy Day School as a substitute nurse, and then we went back to Colorado because it was just not a good time to stay here, but
you get involved with the Methodist Church again, correct?
right.
Yeah, to a certain. You know, one of the things I didn't mention, you know, we were talking about you guys in the church. I mean, it wasn't just, you know, the MYF, but they had Christmas plays and things like that.
We did.
Your dad played the banjo, right?
He did.
Yes.
And he was famous for playing banjo at the
Minstrel shows.
At the minstrel shows, which they don't have anymore, of course. But you know, the minstrel shows were a big part, I guess, kind of a fundraiser as well,
Yeah.
because you used to charge admission. And I can remember actually the CYO running them. We were at the, this is probably 1960 or 61, running one off of the Abbott School in the gymnasium, okay, because it was a big event. So, but your dad played the banjo back then. And your mother at the Methodist Church, okay, she ran the harvest dinners for years,
For years, yeah.
okay? I've gotten questions about that. How come we're not having the harvest dinners? I said, well, when Ruth passed away, I know Melva Shepherd picked it up for a while, and no one's kind of carried it.
Well, Bev Welsh, I think, originally, and
Yeah.
then Melva. And actually, when my mother was quite old, when she was giving it over, she actually would sit there in the kitchen and boss everybody around. You know, as far as how it should be done.
That's right.
Growing up in town, this is a question I asked you earlier. If you went out for ice cream, where did you go?
I went to Rocky Farms.
I went to Kimball's.
You went to Kimball's, interesting. But you did, Rocky Farms, which was a very popular place, but you explained to me it was more hamburgers and hot dogs, too.
For me.
A place to go to eat, yeah.
For instance, in the summertime, the ice cream, but I don't think they sold ice cream from the windows in the winter, did they, Nance?
I don't think they did, no.
No,
No.
because it would, yeah.
I don't, until I can never remember the man who owned it when he got sick, and Eddie was still making ice cream for them for years.
So, you went there, and I know that the 53 yearbook with the picture with Eva Nesmith, okay, who
Yeah.
was your cousin, correct?
Right.
Okay, Eva Nesmith, who was your cousin, who lived in Graniteville, on 4th Street, I believe, yeah, on 4th Street. And she went on to become a teacher at the high school, an English teacher for years and years, yeah. But she's in that picture with Yogi Rogers in front of Rocky Farms at the time. And that was the place I know my family, if we went for ice cream, we never went to Kimball's. Anywhere else along Route, I mean, 110 was like the business district at the time. There was Toys Turkey Farm. Did you get your turkeys from there?
No.
Getting back to, I just want to touch, we're kind of running out of time here, so I want to touch upon a couple of things that just, I think we might have missed. The head of the choir at the Methodist Church. And as I said, you guys spent a lot of time down there. Mr. Stoddard.
Mr. Stodden was
Okay.
the choir director in the Methodist Church.
And I played the organ.
Yeah.
And he loved you, right?
Oh, he hated me.
Yeah. Anyway, he
'Cause I
also
was
was the
terrible.
principal.
He was the principal.
He was the principal of Sergeant School.
Yeah.
So therefore, I had him double whammy. He was very much aware of me.
Well, but you were the good one, and you were the mischievous
Right.
one. Probably that's why he came down hard on you.
He got me so nervous. I remember my father had to go talk to him. He said, listen, if you want anybody up there to play something on Sunday, you better leave her alone.
Yeah.
Because I went down there and practiced night after night after night, and I had no lessons in the organ.
Yeah.
And, well,
Did you have a paper route?
I didn't have a paper route, but I definitely, a friend of mine, Dee Dee Pine,
Okay.
had the paper route, and we used to go on the paper route, and then the extra money that she got, we'd go to Grodno's, which was the store, and get the encapsulated pickles out of the barrel.
Oh, yeah, I can remember those. Sure.
And that's what our treat was for doing the paper route.
You guys said in the wintertime, we mentioned you skated, you said you slid down that hill.
Yeah.
Anything ever happened?
I had the experience. We used to take the toboggan down the hill, and you'd often go off the wall. It just was, the toboggan was very, very hard to control. But we did go down the drive one time, and it was extremely icy. And anyway, a lot of snow too. We were young enough that the cars were really high, and we went under a car that was coming. And I remember hitting, we laid down, we saw it coming, and anyway, we hit the fence that used to be in front of the...
Oh, sweet.
And I swear it was you, but you don't remember this. You'd remember this.
Even I wouldn't do that.
But anyway, the toboggan shattered, and actually the woman knew my mother. And so I definitely heard about it, and we never had a toboggan then, thereafter.
But you know, when you were at the sergeant school, you used to toboggan down.
The bandstand.
Yeah, the band.
Yeah,
I mean, that must have been a ritual there for years, because I was doing that after you guys left there.
But you've got to understand, each one of these mills had one of those, they didn't have a phone thing, they had the thing.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Every one of those machinery were run by very smart ladies who ratted on us every single time. And we really couldn't get away with too much if we were in their vision.
Well, you know, I understand that. But you said you used to go right down in the village down by, well, the fire station was built in 1948. We played kick the can down there.
Kick the can, yes.
Yeah.
That's actually, being on the hill made us more isolated.
Yeah.
So therefore, if we ever played, we had to play down the village.
Yeah.
So anyway, definitely the firehouse, that was the main meeting place.
Meeting place for you guys? Yeah.
And of course, God forbid if there was ever a fire. I don't ever remember that happening.
Well, it's funny you said that was the main meeting place or hangout for you guys. I mean, we went on when I was a teenager. The main place we hung around was, well,
The wall.
the wall in front of. And I can remember your father coming down the hill, and we're all sitting on the wall down there. And this is, you know, fighting juvenile delinquency in Westford. And there's a bunch of cars parked there. We're down there every night. But he come down, and, you know, oh God, here comes Dick Hall. And he's kind of standing there, and he said, somebody said, do you mind us being here? He says, you guys can stay here till the cows come home. And he walked away, you know. And I know, you know, there was some. I remember giving the talk in Graniteville, and one of my neighbors, Jeff Ross, when I was showing a picture of that wall, said, "Is that the wall we used to hang out on?" I says, "It couldn't be, because there was no police cruiser in front of it."
Yeah.
So we were pretty good kids. I mean,
Yeah.
mischievous and all of that.
Once in a while, it was starting to get into drugs.
That was
you know,
after we left. Yeah.
And
Yep.
once in a while, you'd find something.
Yeah, and I know there was other kids that, but that was the '60s, and that happened awful quick, and that's for another show, basically. What's your best memory of Graniteville?
My best man, I've known
Or
that.
growing up in Graniteville?
Growing up in Graniteville. Halloween.
Okay.
Halloween was great fun. Once I was old enough to be let go.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember they had this big train car that was called the
Honey wagon?
Honey Wagon.
Yep.
And I guess they dumped all the bathrooms stuff in it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, every Halloween, somehow or other, it got off the tracks and wound up in the middle of Broadway. And from it would be rolls and rolls and rolls of toilet paper going up. And I never did it because I knew I would be killed. But I loved to go and watch.
Yeah. How about you, Nancy?
I actually think when it comes to the open space and the ability to roam, especially the quarries. I mean, the fact that I had my own swimming pool and that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
I just, there were so many opportunities where you could have freedom that, you know, seatbelts and all the protections they have today, I think they're very restrictive.
And some would say very, very necessary at the same time. I don't know. But you're
true.
right. I mean, you even told me, Barbara, about how your mother would say to you about 6:30, give you a towel and say, go take your bath and head up to the quarry, right?
Bar of soap and a towel. Oh, God.
Well, you know, Graniteville's kind of a different place with different people today, but I've got a lot of those same wonderful memories because it was, you know, it was the areas of town back then were a lot more parochial. You know, Forge Village was Forge Village, and you might have hit with Forge Village kids after you went to high school. But when you were in grammar school, you were, you know, focused on kids, and being the church was there and everything, particularly the Methodist Church.
To this day, there still is the pride of growing up in Forge Village or the, you know.
I often said when I gave, and I did this particularly when I did the segment on Forge Village, and I said, and this is Forge Village history given by a Graniteville kid. Listen, thank you both. I really appreciate it. This is a lot of fun. And I think it gives people an idea what it was like in Graniteville. And thank you all for watching.